I'm Preston Peck. I'm currently a student here in the Sustainable Development Program. And next we have Dr. Dottie Morris, who is Chief Officer of Diversity and Multiculturalism, as well as an Associate Professor of Psychology at Keene State College.
Good afternoon. It's still morning, right? I was just telling Karen, no matter how many times I agree to do something related to public speaking, I'm always in a panic. And I've had every possible disaster you could have, including back in the old days when you'd have overheads. I had written my entire presentation on the overhead without any notes. And I had a glass of water. No. And yeah. So I would encourage you to always have multiple ways of having your presentation available. So I have notes. I have, I emailed it last night. I have it on a little zip drive, whatever you call those things. I brought my computer. I sent it to my Dropbox. And thank goodness I know of people who are very good with technology because they told me about all these modalities. But I'm going to talk a little bit about something that I'm planning to undertake at Keene State College. I don't know if it will be a disaster or will it be a success. I've been there in my current position. I'm going into my 5th year, I think it is. Time goes by so fast. And part of what I was doing was setting the foundation for the work that I'm about to do, the real work. So whenever people would say, what do you do? I didn't know, really, because I was the inaugural Chief Diversity Officer. I've known people who were chiefs, but they were not Chief Diversity Officers. They were like Chief of Police and Chief of a tribal affiliation. So I didn't know what a chief would do. And I was able to really work at designing what I was to do. And part of what we are attempting to do as a result of some feedback from students who said that their experience at Keene State College otherwise was a wonderful experience, fantastic experience. And they didn't feel like it prepared them to work in a global society. They felt like they were losing out on opportunities because they had not been adequately prepared. And so when you fill out those alumni surveys, people do look at them. And as a result of that, the vice president at the time of academic affairs asked me to do some work with the people at the college. And so the rest, as they say, is history. The other thing is, I think is really interesting. I went this, oh, it just appeared. This is miraculous. But is that right? Yes, right. It's just amazing how things just go like, okay. That's a cultural reference that some people might not know what I mean by that. But the other thing is sometimes I talk really fast, so if you need me to slow down, just wave your hand. And the other thing, I have no concept of time, so I hope someone will be watching the time as well. I'm not offended if you say, can you please be Gene the dance machine, you're about to get the hook. But one thing that I grew up in the South too, so what Ryan said resonated with me. And this whole idea of, I grew up hearing a lot of things. And one of the things that I grew up hearing from my mother is, if there's an easy way to do something and a hard way to do something, Dottie, why do you always choose the hard way? And she also had something about a hard head and a soft behind. But I decided that in this situation, with this particular job, that I would, I think I have the best job on the campus because I get to work with everyone. I work with all divisions, all individuals, people from, people who do a wonderful job. If you haven't gone to Keene State College, go and look at the grounds. It's beautiful. So, I work with, men and women who keep the physical plant so amazing to the person who is the president of the college. And I always tell people, if you really want to know people, the president can't get you in your office when you're locked out. So you should be aware of all of the people and how do we engage with everyone on campus. So I decided not to take the hard way, but I always like how nature is designed. And I think nature has given us the rationale for diversity. And so that's why I like to start with this quote, because it's either diversify or die. Because in nature, the only way that we are sustainable is through diversity. And so this whole idea of why do we take the hard way when it comes to understanding the importance of diversity? So my mother would really, really, really ask that question. Why are we taking the hard way? Why are we resisting? What is making it so difficult for us to say that everyone, not just say it, but to really realize that everyone has value, everyone has something important to bring to the table. And without that information, we cannot sustain as a human society. I mean, to me, it's just so simple that everyone will bring something that can contribute to solutions to problems that we have. We're losing a whole generation of young people because we're not engaging them in school. Think about all of that potential that we're losing. Because some kid sits in the back row with his hat on the back of his head and we think, criminal. And we just give up on them. So part of what I'm saying here is that this is a fight for our survival, and that's why I think that diversity is so important. It's possessed. It's left leg? Oh, there. So some food for thought. I ran across this quote that it looks at the whole idea of globalization. And I think that the latter part of this comment is almost like saying it's just going to happen. We don't have to do anything. We're just going to have this thing called globalization. And everybody's just going to come together and everything is going to be cool. And we don't have to work at it. Don't have to work at it. You know, you just get enough people in a room who are different, who are diverse, and bada boom, bada bam, wow, it's going to happen. Now, I beg to differ with that particular opinion, and that's why it has taken this long to consciously think of ways to have an impact at Keene State College. So in my thinking, I think more in terms of what, okay, I'll read this before the left, right? Okay. I believe what Winona LaDuke has to say is that we have to take this on. We don't want just a bigger piece of the pie, we want a whole nother pie. And that's why in the title it talks about co-creation as opposed to inclusion. A student here at SIT really helped me to understand that inclusion was not enough. He said that basically you're saying, I just bring what I have to your table, and then we try to find a way to fit it in there. Instead of how do we bring what we have to the table and recreate something? And I had never really thought about that. So you do, I mean, teaching is a two-way process. And so that was really important to hear and to reflect on over these years, is that I want to go beyond just saying we're going to include more policies, we're going to include more procedures, oh, we're going to include more language to show how and reflect how we really value diversity. I want to go beyond that inclusion and this whole idea of co-creating. So instead of just giving people a bigger piece of the pie, or even a slice of the pie, I want them to help make the pie. Another thing from the South, we like food, so that pie image is a great one for me. So the other thing that happens with me is I have a level of a way of frustrating people. I was the youngest in the family, so this might contribute to that as well. But I tend to have more questions than answers. And I think that part of what happens for me is that I was glad when I read the quote that as a teacher, I can't teach you anything, but I can definitely encourage you and stimulate your thoughts for you to create meaning of what you are hearing from me. And not only that, but to confront what I'm saying, as that student did when I said what I said about inclusion, that caused me to reshape everything, including what I do now. So it was very important that I met him at that time, because it informs my work totally. And so I thank him for that. So I have some questions. And there are a lot of questions. This is just one slide of the questions that I'm planning to pose to the community. And we have a wonderful opportunity. Every 2 years we do a symposium. And this year it's about creating the commons. And several of us have really pushed the envelope on what does that mean? And how do we co-create a space, especially in a space that was taken? That's not, how do you create a space, or commons, in a place that ain't yours? Excuse me, that isn't yours, okay? How do you do that? How do you claim that space and think that you can create that space without having some of these conversations? We have to have these conversations. And so part of it, so the whole idea of how we co-create institutions when we don't look at the social, political, historical, economic context. We have to look at that. So some economists are planning to do that. What roles does worldview, power, and privilege play when we're trying to co-create? Now, again, we're out of this little school in New England with roughly 5,600 students. We have about 6% students from of color. I'll put it in quotes because I don't know what that means, but okay, we'll just leave it at that. And we have other varying forms. We have less than 1% students from international backgrounds. So the list goes on. So people are like, we don't really need to do this because we're in New Hampshire. And I said, even more so we have to do it, and even more so we have to ask these questions. And so this whole idea of you could just read them. I won't read them to insult you by reading them to you, but this whole idea of who has the power and how does their ethnocentric views and their thoughts about supremacy, for example, have an impact, first of all, of giving up the spaces that they've once owned. So we have to talk about that. So again, we have to go to the next. Let's go to the next slide because I have more questions. But I see. How do people who have historically controlled the spaces now? How do they stay to these spaces? And as we co-create, we got to give up some of the control. And that will be the complicated. That's the complicated. Because think about it. When something is working for me, I'm going to keep it that way. You know why? Because it's working for me. Therefore, if I change it, it might not work for me in the same way. So that means I have to adjust. That's just so exhausting. I don't want to work that hard, even though my mother said I'd take the hard way. So I can understand the resistance where you've historically controlled the space, and now all of a sudden I'm saying, let's co-create something. Let's not just add programs, but let's really look at how we do business, why we do business the way we do. How might we shift the way that we do business to live our values and our missions related to diversity. So that's it. And I have one more slide for you with questions because I can't not let you have questions. And so, so how can we do it without having truth and reconciliation process in some ways? And also, how do we analyze the past to see how it continues to have a ripple effect on what we're currently experiencing? There's so many, we call it in psychology elephants in the room or ghosts in the room, and elephants are knocking us in the head and they're kicking us, and we're just sitting there going, just dodging the elephants, attempt to get our attention. And if we don't talk about these things directly, they fester, they fester, they fester. And I'm not an architect or anything, but I know that you need to have a firm foundation to build a house. And if that foundation is faulty in any way, or if you plant that foundation in a swamp without taking into consideration certain factors, I don't care how beautiful that house looks, how many colors you have represented in that house. I don't care if you get the finest interior decorator to take care of that home, what will happen to that home will not last very long, and it's not sustainable. So I think that that's why I'm really keen on this whole idea to look at kind of the complexities involved in the historical pieces that's having an effect on how people in there, and I've learned that. As I said, I grew up in Louisiana, and I've lived in New England for like 15 years. People have a long memory here. And they have a memory, and this is not as criticism, it's just an analysis that I have to take into account when I'm working with people to try to get them to move beyond certain kinds of things. So they'll tell me, well, Dottie, that won't work. And I'll say, why? Back in 1942, when my father was here, They tried that once. It didn't work. So you are wasting your time. And most of all, that faculty, they never watch. Now, 1942, I would probably argue that none of those faculty members are still at Keene State College. I would be willing to go out on a limb. I'd be willing to bet my house that's falling down because that I don't want to bet too much here because just in case there might be one person who's still hanging on. But I would be willing to bet that person isn't there anymore. But we're still holding on to that history that gets transferred from one generation to the next. We laugh at students when they talk about, there's this residence hall on campus and it's called Huntress. And there's this, they've passed this legend down that her wheelchair is in the attic and you can hear her wheeling around at night. Okay? So that goes from student to student to student, and students will tell me, I've heard it. Okay, so the same thing happens with these ghosts of the past that seep in. I understand why they seep in. So part of what I'm trying to do is say that the legacies are still there and people are still not dealing with them. So I think our usual response is to do something that is so individualistically based. That we don't think about how complex these questions are and concerns are, because we need to come up with some compound strategies and solutions. And this is by a colleague of mine, Michael Antonucci, who teaches English at Keene State. When we were talking about this in a group one day, he says, we have to realize that what we're about to undertake is not simple. And I always tell people it's not rocket science, it's harder. Because there's so many moving pieces, there's so many complexities upon complexities. I can't figure out the right formula. So that's why it has to be done in community. So the very idea that it's so complex will lead to living the tenements of what I think of diversity. It's because it's so complicated. It's because I don't have the answers. Because I'm like, okay, we need all of us to figure this out and to spend time really, really struggling with this together and come up with a product that we can all be proud of. So I think that most of the time, we don't do this. We do. Yes. Janet Helms is a psychologist who at Boston College, and she talks about the different stages of identity development. And I think that oftentimes, a lot of our solutions are based on our stage of being in pseudo-independence. And pseudo-independence is the stage where you understand that there's a problem, you understand that there's injustice, but you think that you need to alter the individual who is in the non-dominant position. That if we could just help them, then they would do better. So our solutions are like this. Black men don't go to college. What we're going to do, I got a good idea. Write a grant, get $1 million, and we're going to set up some programs for them in the college so they can catch up with the other students. Now, I believe in that. So if you have $1 million and you're planning to give it, I would take it. Okay? To me, that's too simplistic. To me, that's basically putting the onus on the individual and not on the structures that we have in place that might be creating situations where black men don't want to come to college. Does that make sense? To me, that's qualitatively different if I'm framing it through the Helms lens of that particular stage versus framing it, in addition to that, thinking about the larger systemic factors contributing to what's going on. The other thing that happens is it's almost kind of like the simulationist belief that if we could get them to just act right, conform to the way we do stuff, then they would be okay. And because they don't, that's why they're not successful. They have not figured out how to navigate the system. So guess what? Because we're individualistic in thinking, who gets the brunt of the blame? We don't, and again, it's not intent. I don't think people's in their office going, let's see. We have a problem here. I know what it is. It's those individuals. You just can't cut it. Now, some people do. And then you do this. I've seen this one. We did all we could do. We gave them all this money. Some of the first programs to be cut, everywhere from You could go up I-91 to Dartmouth, down to UMass. And the same kinds of things happen. You know why? Because we haven't done the foundational work of examining the system. And of course those people, fill in the blank, women people in the sciences, men people in general in some schools, we haven't done the work to really do an analysis of our systems, of our policies, of our procedures, of our practices. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I was told that you should never ask a closed-ended question because people just go, So it's consistent with that. So this whole idea, so we have to look at that. And there's something called the fundamental attribution error. And I based a lot of this on social psychology. So it's not like I'm just pulling this out of my head. I wish I did because then I'd just be writing books and be on Oprah. But, so I have to borrow, as Jeff does, from other people. And again, why do it the hard way if it already exists? So there's this fundamental attribution error that social psychologists talk about. And basically, you tend to blame certain behavior on the individual. So if I were to walk across this room and I trip, you'd probably say, God, Dottie is clumsy. Because you're looking at an individual, something in me that's creating the trip, without and ignoring or denying that there might be environmental factors contributing to that. So part of what we have to do is we have to talk about in what ways are we engaging in this fundamental attribution error, because sometimes it is the person. You have to admit, sometimes it is the person, because sometimes you are that person. And then there's nothing about that environment that isn't, it's just you. Sometimes, how people say it's not me, it's you, but sometimes it is you. But I love that one, okay. So, we need to move on before I get the hook. And then I have to do that little dance, and you don't want to see me dance. But anyway, so you understand how that can lead to victim blaming. How it can lead to, we've given them all we can, we've supported them with all of this money, all of these programs, but we're not going to look at our system. Because our system works. Because we have so many thousands of graduates. So it must be working. It must be working. So if it's working for them, it must be something wrong with them. But so we have to do a critical analysis of why it works for some and not for others. So it leads me to more questions. So how is it for those of us who do this business of diversified organizations, do something different? How do we challenge one another and other organizations to do something different? I can only talk about higher ed and the work that I'm trying to do, and then in probably 3 or 4 years I'll tell you how it works, because I plan to document it and really look at the effects of it, and I'll talk about that plan in a minute. And how do we go beyond just merely adding more people or adding token kind of ideas without changing systems? So I know what we're asking people to do is to stop being entrenched in a system that for some of them, they feel like it's really working and it's very effective. And then how do we co-create and reinvent a new one? A more diverse organization where we can really, really live up to our mission. And so part of what I did was I went to some other social psychologists, because social psychologists helped me to really think about how could I, in an academic setting, you have to come up with things like this, because if it just comes out of your head without, people are like, yeah, right. But because I grabbed, I know about the work of these folks, I said, they are credible sources of people who will believe me when I say it, So think about it, even though I might have said it before. But part of what one of the first things that we did last year, I just want to back up a minute, was we had Alan Johnson, I don't know, he wrote Power, Privilege, and Difference, come to campus, and he ran 3 workshops. And it was really interesting because the big rift that we see, not unlike a lot of institutions of higher education, is around rank. Like who's faculty, who's staff. We have the tenure system, and then we have the adjunct system, and then you have people who are staff. But even staff, you have operating staff and professional staff. And then you have the administration. I didn't know I was part of the administration until somebody told me one day. I was like, wow, this is kind of scary. So anyway, going back to this whole idea of looking at different ways of looking at diversity, there is something called structural diversity. And so you do have to attend to structural diversity, which includes having numbers, to have a critical mass. And we do know that you learn more in heterogeneous settings. We already know that. So we cannot approach this and think that we don't have to have numbers, critical masses of people. But I think that when we think again, that's the only thing that we're thinking about. A lot of people only think about the numbers. If you get more students here, Dottie, we need it to be up in the I'm saying, I'm not giving you a number. I said, I can't give you a magical number. And so sometimes when I'm forced, I just pick one. By 2015, 10%. What is that based on? Well, you forced me to give you a number. Because it's a lot deeper than just having the number of students there, okay? And this takes into account things, in my mind, things like retention efforts, as well as recruitment efforts, okay? The next one has to do with diversity-related initiatives. So this has to do with trainings that people need to undertake. And not just the training of, Diversity 101, but what are the implications of some of the things that Rylan brought up? That I have to understand who I am and what I bring to the table and why I behave the way that I do, and why I might silence the staff member and talk over them when I'm in a meeting. I have to ask myself, why is it when we're sitting around a table and a woman raises an idea and no one says anything, and 15 minutes later a man says it, it's like, oh my God, it must have come from the heavens. Now, I don't think that people are aware. Again, it's not about people being evil and rotten and sitting in their office, I'm going to screw up some woman today. I don't think that you all are adults, so I can say that. I don't think it's like that. I think that part of what happens is we get get into default mode and we respond. What I want to do is people to slow that process down. Because the work that they will be doing, they will have to understand how this is having an impact on their process of getting the work done. The third one he talks about is diversity interactions. And so we have to develop strategies to have or increase more positive interactions between people. And that has to do with training, it has to do with a whole host of activities that we have planned. And we have to understand hierarchy, because there is a hierarchy. We have a president, we have vice presidents, we have associate vice presidents, we have assistant vice presidents, we have chairs of the department, we have tenured faculty, we have full professors, the list goes on. There is a hierarchy there. But we have to at least be able to talk about what does that hierarchy mean, and how does it have an impact on who makes decisions and how those decisions are made. And so, again, I was planning to talk about the plan, but I noticed I have a minute left. But this whole idea, this is the kind of the plan, is to assemble the stakeholders, and I already have several people who are planning to do it. So what I want to do is go with the energy that's there, the people who want to do this work, and then get some of the people who are the not usual suspects and appoint them to make it seem really official, okay? And it will be official because I've got that. So this whole idea of how do we get people together, and then there are tasks that they'll have to do. So we'll orientate them to the culture. We did a campus climate survey that really gave us some really good data to help inform some of the work we're going to do. Then we put people in subcommittees, and we're going to divide the labor that way. And then each subcommittee will get training, and we'll do all these things, and then they'll research best practices, because people like to do that. And then we'll come up with an action plan. All the committees will meet together, and then we'll put it out to the full campus to get more feedback on how we're planning to transform our campus, and not just come up with program after program after program, including getting more people trained, including right now, all new employees have to go through a training with me. So I do some of these things in that training to prepare. It's only new staff, not new faculty. So just to let you know that happens. And these are the other tasks, and so we'll do this, and this will give me some data. So I hope that at one point in the future I'll be able to say it was very successful. And everything we do is in line with this. Especially this last thing is that it won't be business as usual. That we will be using everything as that background because we've analyzed our history. It started off as a teacher's college. So what better place, a teacher's college? Well, it was a normal school. It was like, anyway, the other schools must have been abnormal at the time. But it started off as a teacher's college. And so that meant that the majority of the women who were trained in 1909, people who were trained were women, probably up into the 1940s. So there's a legacy of having women on that campus and being empowered in a particular way. And now we're seeing that a lot of our attrition rate among young women, we're starting to lose young women at a higher rate than young men. And we need to understand what's going on within the culture that's creating that. So hopefully we'll be able to line up our actions with our mission statement as well as with our value statement. And I think that it won't be business as usual, that everything that we consider, including contracts that we have with certain organizations, we will rethink those in the future. So thank you very much. I hope I didn't talk too fast.